Get to the church blind! Get to the church blind! Go! Now!
I'm Pete Mitchell, and he's Peyton Jones, and you're listening to Hardcore Church Planning, the companion podcast for the Church Planner Podcast and Church Planner Magazine. Each week, we'll bring you interviews from planners who are in the trenches making it happen right now. These active church planners bear it all, share their successes, their failures, and what they'd wish they'd known when they were first starting out. Listen in to discover how God is working in their church plant.
Hey, church planner, this is Peyton Jones, and I am here with a guest, a coworker, kind of, although we never interact with each other because we're in different training tracks. But I am here with author, church planner, and really a course builder, architect, and urban church planning expert by the name of Dhati Lewis. And Dhati, welcome.
Oh, welcome. I'm excited. Thank you. I didn't know I had all those descriptors on me.
Brother, I could have added, conference speaker extraordinary, MC massive church planning legend. We could have just blueprint architect, blueprint network founder. We could have kept going, but
man, you create this high expectation and it's only downhill from here. So it's so let's keep the bar low.
All right, brother. Well, my guests are used to that, and so is my audience. So let's crack on, man. So you've got a book out right now, and it is a book that we'll get into a little bit more. I just want to say at the outset, it's been published by B&H, and it's called Among Wolves, Disciple Making in the City. This has been a book that I've been excited to see come out because you lead a training in the North American Mission Board that you were leading before, but I think they adopted you and said, hey, will you train our urban church planners? And so it's an urban church planning track called Boulevard. It's for our listeners. I'm not telling Dhati this. He knows all this. But he wrote a book called Among Wolves, which is kind of like the blueprint for this. How do you train church planners? So I've been really excited because all of us that are in the Multiply training have wanted to kind of peek over your shoulder and see what do you train in church planners. And so that's very, very cool. Did I get that wrong or did I get that right?
No, you hit it spot on. Spot on. It was it's been a joy to live, really more so live out than to write. I'm definitely a practitioner at heart. And so just the ability to kind of put my thoughts on paper it was humbling, and then, and as a practitioner, that it seems like because you're so intuitive into the context that you're actually ministering to at the time, there's always those nuances. And so writing the book was really difficult from that vantage point because of the nuances and the ability to adapt it based upon the context that we're in. So, because we know that there's no true, urban is so diverse and in terms of urban, it's different. I remember it was years back that I walked into a store and it was called Urban Outfitters. And when I was at this Urban Outfitters, I was just like, there's nothing urban about this outfitter, about the Urban Outfitters. And I realized that people's different definition of urban and what urban is so drastic.
You know what? I learned what I think is the most helpful definition from you, hearing you speak. It's funny because I was a church planner in an urban context in Long Beach, just literally 2 blocks from where the Sin Conference was held a couple of weeks back. Because you start off in the book kind of, laying down, I think it's almost like paragraph 1. You lay down what urban is. Can you give your definition? Because it's the most helpful I've ever
heard.
Very
simple. It's very simple. My definition of urban is density and diversity. And I think that is critical because most of what we talk about urban, a lot of times, especially as a minority, you think about, if I say urban, people automatically assume inner city, poor, Black and Latino, right? But that is not what makes up most of the urban context anymore. Right? These, because of gentrification, because of all the different dynamics that are happening, that is no longer solely the sole definition. On the one end, I don't define urban by inner city, I define it by density and diversity. But on the other end, I don't run away from inner city as well.
Right.
Because inner city is a part of urban. But I think a lot of times people, I don't want people to be confused. Don't go reading this book thinking that you're going to think about here's disciple making in the inner city. That's not what I'm trying to do, attempting to do. I'm trying to think through how do we move to more of a density and diversity that we're seeing across the country and really around the world.
And it's interesting because there are different dynamics. So if our church planners, and we're totally breaking protocol here, because normally we'd ask you how you came to faith, and we will get back to that, but our conversation hit the ground running. But one of the things that, like when, city planners talk, or when, people are looking at like an urban landscape, there are differences between a suburban way of thinking and an urban way of thinking. So for example, like shop owners in an urban context, when city planners are planning everything out, people tend in an urban context to do most of their business within a 5-minute walking radius. And so if you've been planning in a suburban context and you're thinking, we're going to be the church that people drive to, that's not how an urban community works. Yeah. And so right away, having somebody speak into that immediately, that there are different ways of living, really, not just thinking, but living. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit it spot on. I mean, which goes into so many different dynamics as you think about how you engage a community or how you engage a city. And I think that's really one of the things that we have to come to grips with, especially those who are trying to plant in harder cities or urban centers, is we have to move kind of from an ethnic missiology to a neighbor missiology of how do I reach my neighbor? Because a lot of times if you go in and just, with the old Saddleback Sam model of putting one type of person up and just assume that whoever is going to drive to your context, the thing is that you may be successful, but you're not successful in necessarily reaching those in the area in which you're planting. And that may not be people's goals, but it's interesting to me as so many of us in this kind of this urban movement to kind of plant more urban, we go into the urban context, but we're reaching still the gentrified or the suburban people that are coming in to the city for the better show. And they're not necessarily reaching our neighbors and the people that are in our neighborhood. And so, for us at Blueprint Church, we just want to kick against that. And so like our goal is that we want 50% of our people to be able to walk to church, and so we kind of draw, we kind of think of define it by a 1.5 square mile radius. And that's about a 30-minute walk. And that's what we really want 50% of our people to come from that area. And so that's really kind of our heart and how we go about doing that.
That's really good, man. And I think whenever I hear you talk about church and what it's been like, or I've watched your videos are outstanding. I don't know where people can get a hold of one of your videos. Do you have a place on the web where those live?
Yeah, there's multiple places right now. Most of our stuff is held on just the Blueprint website, so blueprintchurch.org. But I've also, as you know, as a fellow author, now I've been forced to make a Facebook fan page. So the Facebook fan page now is going to be a place where I'm going to be holding, and I'm starting to upload all of the things, that I'm in or about. And, I laugh because anybody who knows me knows, like, I am that dude. Like, I get on Facebook like once a month or once every 2 months. And then when I get on, I got like messages from like 2 months ago. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to ignore you. I just don't get on Facebook.
Brother, I was literally like you, like until I got my first book deal, I didn't even have a Facebook account, because to me, that was like someone sitting in Starbucks going, I'm having a cupcake. It's so cool. And I'm like, I don't care. Yeah. And I don't think you should care when I'm eating a cupcake. Like, who cares? Yeah. So, it's funny, but when I hear you or watch you talk about church, and you and I have a lot of similarities in how we approach the whole gathering of God's people, but the mission that's involved in that, simultaneously and this and that. But for me, whenever I'm hearing, what you're saying, I'm like, that's the church I want to go to, man. Like, that is that community, that community beyond Sundays. I think this is very much what even a suburban, all of our suburban pastors out there have something to learn from this. So guys, don't be listening today and think, I'm not planning an urban church. Listen, the same issue that Dhati laid out where, you can plant in an urban context and not reach the neighborhood. This is exactly what's happening in suburban communities. In fact, I would say this is in the majority of pastors. They drive through a neighborhood to get to their church. Maybe it's their own neighborhood. They leave their driveway. They drive past neighbors they don't even know. They drive maybe halfway across town where they got a warehouse, and they drive through yet another neighborhood of people that their church doesn't reach, much like their own neighborhood, to get to the church office where they lock themselves in a building all day in a cubicle, and they become clerics. And I don't mean the religious kind, I mean like clerks for Jesus, and pencil pushers for Jesus is what I call them. And so, what Dhati lays out here, I'm not going to steal your thunder here, but give us kind of the outline of the book. How's it broken down? Because that's kind of a powerful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really an outlining of the book of Matthew. It's not a commentary on Matthew. It is just taking Matthew and what I would say at face value. The book of Matthew starts off with just this burden that to bring a tangible expression of Jesus. He talks about, we will call him Emmanuel, God with us. That there's a desire and a burden to establish a tangible expression. And then it ends with him saying, go therefore and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And lo, I will always be with you. So it starts with this burden and desire to bring about God to be with us. And then it ends with Jesus mobilizing an army saying, go therefore and make disciples, and I will be with you. And so really what we're trying to do is that we take 8 significant movements that we see in the book of Matthew, taking us from a burden that we have to bring a tangible expression of Jesus to our context, to mobilizing a people and looking at the life of Jesus and taking it. So there's 8 movements that we just walk through. And it is really an opportunity for anybody who has a burden. And it's not just church planners. It can be mission community leaders. It can just be mom that this has a burden to bring about a tangible expression of Jesus. And we think that the community of God that is professing born-again believers is a tangible expression of that. And so anybody who has that desire to do that is kind of how we've laid out the book.
It's really cool, man, because I love Matthew. I don't know why, but that's my favorite gospel. And I think because of the kingdom language, that whole idea of the kingdom expanding. Any of us that are kind of more apostolic, where that's our love language, man, is you're talking about the kingdom expanding. What I loved about this is it's gospel centered. And you point out, hey, this stuff is gospel centered, local church based. But even the movements, right, that you observe in Matthew, that you're training guys, hey, and gals as well. Vision from burden, movement 2 is establishing family. Just backing up there, that vision from burden. We hear a lot about vision nowadays, and a lot of times you think of a bunch of guys stuck in a boardroom with a whiteboard on the wall, and but the vision from burden, I think, is a powerful concept. Can you just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, this comes from our kind of oversaturation in conferences, concerts, church services. I mean, what we do is that we create what I call a copycat Christianity, right? It's where we go in and we listen to our favorite heroes, whether it's Swindoll or Stanley or Martin Luther King or whoever it may be.
You didn't mean Stan Lee, right? Like from, you meant Stan Lee, like, and I had to check.
You had to check, Stan Lee. Yeah. But, and that's what we do is that we go and we'll find the person's like, man, I love what they do. I love the success they have. Let me just go take what they have and go and do that. And so really we just take the principle of how do we authenticate this burden, but without trying to go, I'm going to look within, because a lot of times when people think authenticating, I just got to keep your original burden, you have to first look within. So we started, we says, in order to have a vision from burden, you have to start with God's burden or God's story. And then from that, you understand God's burden or God's story. You have to understand your personal story, God's providence in your life and how he has fearfully and wonderfully made you. But then you can't stop there. You also got to look at the life of others, that God has surrounded you around, and how has he burdened them? But then you also look at the story or the burden, or the story of the city that you're in. And then with all of those 4 stories overlap is where you're going to find a vision from burden, And I think a lot of times I use the story of David. In the story of David, when he's seeing Saul, he doesn't go and take on Saul's armor, when he's fighting Goliath. He said, no, I can't put on your armor, because if I put on your armor and I end up trusting your armor, then I'll miss it. But I have to trust the sovereign God and how God has fearfully and wonderfully made me in this context, and being able to use it. And I think we will get something that's more authenticated, because I really believe authenticity is the apologetic of our day. And if we're not real, then we'll miss it. We'll miss it. And I think this copycat Christianity, where we're taking a piece of everybody's vision and trying to kind of hodgepodge our own, people see right through it. And you don't see the burden, to the kind of the more imperative to have to do it.
Absolutely. And the way God designed nature is that, when you see a big oak tree and you see, all those massive branches, there's a mirror image underneath the ground there. And I think what a lot of people, and you bring this up, that one of your mentors had said, we got to be careful with ministry, because, often our gifting will take us places our character can't handle. And you see that a lot of people want a shortcut to success, and God doesn't do that. And the same with your church. Why would God plant this church with all these branches and all this size and girth, and not the roots that go down deep, that hard work you got to do with God breaking your heart, the Holy Spirit coming in and transforming and humbling you, like getting you to say things like, I don't understand. I've misjudged the people in this neighborhood. Just having all of that dismantling that has to happen. I don't think any important work, even, we could sit and talk about, the immense amount of work God had to do just to get the 12 to go reach the Gentiles. Right. Yeah. We could talk about, Peter's vision 3 times. I mean, there's some deep work sometimes that has to be done before outreach starts. And there's a process and a journey. And I love that you bring that out. And speaking of that, let me springboard into that, because we kind of shortchanged you at the beginning where we didn't stop. Where did your vision from burden come from? How did you get involved in this crazy little thing called church planting?
Well, I mean, for me, it was I wasn't raised in the church at all. So just to give you the short version of it, not being raised in the church, my dad played pro football. So my God and everything I did was around professional sports, and specifically professional football. Football was my God. Everything I did and didn't do was based on that. Didn't get a scholarship to a major Division I school out of high school. And that really was the very thing that God used. Now, I grew up in the typical, like my dad played football, but what I didn't tell you was when he got cut, that same year we were on welfare. And so I grew up pretty much from 5th grade through high school, kind of with the typical inner city kid story, living with aunts and grandma and all that. Because my dad also left us and he disappeared for a few years doing that. So I grew up with that typical, but I never had a problem because football was always my incubator. As long as football was good, I was good. But what God used was he snatched football, at least Division I football, because I wanted to be a pro athlete like my dad. And it was there that he snatched me up and says, man, there's something more. So I started studying world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, African tribalism. I became a world religions major. And it was at that time, Christianity was the one thing that spoke to me that says, you're not good enough and you need a savior. Mm-hmm. I came to know the Lord in 1995. In 96, I got a scholarship to the University of North Texas. At North Texas, met this group of people. They were talking about stories like David and Goliath, Samson and Delilah. I was like, who are these people? Because I wasn't raised in the church. I would go back and as a football mindset, I would go back and man, I need to be in spiritual tour days. So I was going to InterVarsity, Campus Crusade for Christ. I was at a different study every single night because I felt all Christians know their Bible. So I need to catch up and learn my Bible. And what happened was at these studies, I started hearing things like evangelism and disciple making. And I was like, I know my friends love the Lord. And what I found out is that they know stories about the Bible, but they don't really know the essence of the Bible. because to them, Christianity was don't go to the club, don't drink, don't have sex outside of marriage. It was all the don't do's. And I'm just like, man, God is actually calling us to do something. And from someone who's coming from the urban context, I would always try to bring people, my friends, to some of these studies, which these studies were predominantly majority culture studies. So they would come and it was like, man, I love the teaching, but I'm not feeling the acoustic guitar. I'm not, it was always something that was like hindering. So I was just like, man, so my call to ministry was based upon just a burden to be like, man, I want to bring this to my context, to where I'm. And it wasn't that it was just totally void, but it was just so like in my area, it just wasn't available. And because I wasn't raised in the church, we did what I was like, I want to create something that I would want to come to. And so that's when we started doing hip hop and things like that. And that's when people like, you know, Lecrae and my brother Sho Baraka and Tadashi and all that.
That guy's awesome.
Yeah, they came.
I listen to that guy.
That's what I'm saying. And so they were the ones doing it because I was more of an athlete. You know, I was just more of a dude that, but when they came to know the Lord, we started doing those things. And it was just one of those things that God just took it off from there. And then we started realizing that our story wasn't a unique story, but there's people across the country, you know, that have the same story, that they felt like, man, either I'm around a group of people who understands the urban context, but they don't have the same commitment to theology and missions and, you know, or I'm around a group of people who understand urban but they don't have the same commitment to theology. So either people get me theologically, but not contextually, or people get me contextually, but not theologically. And it produced what we call third culture kids. No one really gets us. And I just wanted to be, and so really it was at that point, like my call was like, I want to be the last generation that has to leave the urban context in order to get sound disciple making.
Wow.
And that's been really the burden, the heart that has driven every decision, every single thing that, you know, that has shaped, you know, what I'm doing. And so that's kind of the burden that I have. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, just kind of my story, because I think it's important to know a person's story, even in writing the book, because there's a reason why Andy Stanley wrote Choosing to Cheat, right? Because he grew up in a family with dad, you know, there's all types of, it's a part of his story.
Yep.
That's why he's the type of person that God needed to bring up to talk to pastors about, if you're going to cheat anything, don't cheat don't cheat your family, cheat the church.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think those are the realities that we have to have, and, you know, and making sure. So I mean, that's really where I'm just like, I really try to press into that and really using the story of Joseph, of how you see God authenticating that burden in Joseph, and how he used both God's story, Joseph's stories, the story of others around him, you know, with Mary and John the Baptist and others, to bring a tangible expression. And the context was Jerusalem, right? And so God operated in that way, and you see that in the book of Matthew. And we don't have to imagine. We can take these principles and apply them to our context and authenticate our own burden and our own story.
That is, and that is some powerful stuff right there. One of the things I appreciate about you is your boldness. That kind of bold honesty that doesn't come out with an arrogance to say, hey, I got all the answers, but, you know, to be willing to call the church out, to call leadership out, to say, hey, this can't be like, you know, the church isn't a homogenous body of people, so we can't think that one group of people has it all figured out. And I think, like I said, I believe, kind of like your vision where you said, you know, I want to grow up in the last generation that has to leave the urban context to get these things. I actually believe that in future, kind of like I hinted at earlier, that the urban context is going to lead the suburban context, because all of the things that the urban context is doing extremely well are the things that the suburban context needs. You know, within suburban context, people are going, we need community. You know, people are leaving this generation doesn't want to go to the big box church and watch their performance. They want to get involved. They want to have families for their kids. They want a neighborhood church. There's been a shift.
Yeah. Amen. And I think one of the impacts that you see with gentrification, people think gentrification only impacts the urban context, but it actually impacts all of us, suburban, rural, because they're giving the people that are indigenous to the urban context, they're giving them vouchers to suburban areas,
That's right.
and so they, not only is America now the most diverse country in the world, but we are also, they said, according to I forgot what poll, but they said that since 2006, there's now more people living in poverty in suburban and rural areas than there now in the city. So this is no longer we can kind of quarantine the issues to a certain context. The suburban issues and the urban issues and rural issues, that there's going to be a lot more of a blend. And most sociologists actually state that the real thing that's going to happen is not just a center city urban, but it's now based upon suburban and rural places becoming more urban and embracing more of this density and diversity that's taking place. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So it's something that we can no longer run from. We can no longer run from it. We don't have to deal with it and face it head on.
Absolutely. Some of my relatives were moved out of projects into a suburban project, and it an hour and a half away from Los Angeles, and you are seeing this, and also too, you mentioned that we're seeing the the poverty. I lived in Europe for 12 years. Mm-hmm. And there was, there are many, many more affluent people, but Americans walk around thinking like, we're the richer country than all the other countries. But having lived in Europe for 12 years, and again, the same things we're talking about are the things that, the same things in the urban context are the same things you do in the European context. Yeah. And it's the things that America, but you have far more poverty in America. And I don't think the average American, because, we hear the echo chamber of our news and we just talk about American news all the time. It's just America, America, America. When you live in Europe, you realize that their poverty is not the depth of our poverty. And it's not even the breadth of our poverty. It's very, very much different. There's even a higher standard of poverty there than you have here. People don't realize that.
Yeah. And I mean, I've talked to my 7 brothers that I have that are planting churches over in London in the UK, and that's exactly it's similarities, but like you just said, what you're highlighting is the same thing that they accent in talking to them as we wrestle through some of these similar issues. And Stetzer always even talks about this idea. He says in most other countries, the poverty is primarily in the suburbs. In the center city is more is where the people of wealth live. And he says America's different in that way. And so that's something that's unique that Stetzer always quotes and talks about.
Yeah. And guys, you're going to get a lot of insights from this book, Among Wolves. I mean, an entire generation of urban planners are being trained with some of this. And like I said, my hope today has been for those of you that aren't planting the urban context, even those of you ministering, you pick this book up because, like I said, these principles are New Testament. They're grounded in Scripture. They're gospel-centered. They're local church-based. And they are things that are going to help you no matter what context you're in. The book is called Among Wolves, Disciple Making in the City by Dhati Lewis. And you can grab it on Amazon. You can grab it on christianbook.com. And like my co-host used to say, wherever fine Christian books are sold. So check out Dhati's Facebook fan page. Was that Dhati Lewis? Just go to Dhati Lewis.
Yeah, Dhati Lewis fan page. This is new to me. So you'll find the beautiful thing is that there's not too many Dhati Lewises. Dhati.
Yep, Dhati Lewis. Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, hey, we have one last question that we always ask every guest, and we're going to ask it for you, Dhati. And we've had to think long and hard about this because each guest is unique and different. And we usually kind of, when my co-host is here, we put money on this. And normally we know we don't put money on it, but normally we kind of say who we think before the show is going to win. But this is a question we ask every guest at the end. The lineup changes every time. But if you, Dhati, were to get into a physical fist fight with D.A. Horton, who would win?
Man, my reach. I'm tall. I think I got like a foot on DA. I mean, I'll just kind of just keep jabbing him, jab. You know, DA would probably have to go dirty on me in order, but I think I'd be ready for him. So yeah,
I think you would. See, my money would have been on you. So
yeah, I'm gonna go with me because I'm gonna keep him away from the body. I won't let him get to the body.
Yeah. I would imagine that would be true, and he's kind of nice. Like, he's a nice dude. He's kind of mellow, you know?
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel very convicted, though. Like, that's the issue. Because DA is kind of like, he's one of the most godly dudes I know. And, you feel just like, man, like DA would probably be the one, I'm just going to lay my life down for you, brother. So you win. That's probably how he would even approach it. See, I'm even convicted answering the question now because of DA, how I know he would answer the question.
Hey, that's always our hope, is to make our guests feel uncomfortable and a little bit awkward at the end of the show. But, we had Mac Lake on last week, and we asked him, Will Mancini, and he went to town on Will Mancini. That was good. He went to town on him. But when we asked Will, months earlier, Will said the same thing where he said, I feel so bad. Mac's so nice. Little did he know, months later, Mac would say, I'd kill him.
see, but sometimes it's those nice people that you got to watch the most.
That's what I was going to say. See, because what we don't realize is that's a weapon in and of itself, right? It's not intimidation. It's a different force at work there. And that's my train. That just exists here. And which is normally the time that, like, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is telling us it's time to get off. It's time to leave make-believe land. So anyways, our guest has been Dhati Lewis. Check out his book, Among Wolves. Definitely pick it up. Dhati, thanks for being a guest.
Thank you for being here and having me on. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to reading your book.
Oh, well, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Dhati endorsed it. I twisted his arm, and we got it. And anyways, guys, have a great week. And Arnold, sign us out.
Remember, if you are called to church planting, go hardcore or go home.
You've been listening to Hardcore Church Planting. Hardcore Church Planting has been brought to you by the Church Planter Podcast and the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the App Store for both Apple and Android devices. If you like this episode, leave us a positive review. If you didn't like this episode, we'll be happy to give you your money back.